101 review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He's an acupuncturist, coach, and of course an author too, no other than Mr. Oran Kivity.
Hi, Daniel. Thanks for having me on.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Oran, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Yes, indeed. So, I'm British. You can probably tell from my accent. I'm based in Taiwan and I'm an acupuncturist. I'm a book author. I'm kind of a publisher, I guess, helping other people to publish their books. And I'm a coach.
Indeed. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world, Mr. Aran, and hoping for more and more empowering coaching and, of course, books to come. And let's talk about the book of your mother, Miss Ruth Jordan. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, my mum, she died quite some time ago, and she was born in what was then known as British Palestine. So the British took over Palestine after the First World War. So she was born in 1921, like more than 100 years ago. And she wrote various books. She was a biographer in English, and she also wrote her memoirs of growing up in pre-war Palestine when it was basically a British mandate. And so her book is written from the point of view of a child. She's like a little girl running around on the beach. That's why it's called Daughter of the Waves. And as she tells the story of her life and growing up and going to school and learning languages, she also tells the life of um, the Jewish people living in Palestine at that time. And as the culture started to solidify, and people started to immigrate from Europe, and she tells that story and against the backdrop of these kind of tumultuous social events, and also the refugees from Germany, the Arab Revolt, and the Second World War.
Interesting, Mr. Aran. How does the memoir portray interactions between different religions or ethnic communities in Palestine? And what
Yeah,
tensions or
right.
harmonies
That
emerge?
that's a very good question. The book starts off with a really lovely anecdote where she is walking with her father and her brother, and it's really hot, and she just remembers it's 1926, maybe. It's a really hot summer's day, and she hears the kind of clip 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 of a donkey, and a donkey comes behind, and it's an Arab guy, and he's got a coffin in the back, and he slows down and he starts to say, "Oh, you know what? Your little girl is slowing you down." And eventually he gives her a ride and she sits on the coffin, and he's very kind to her, and her father is talking in Arabic to him. He's talking in Arabic to her father, and everyone's getting on really well. So it's kind of, it sets the tone, because I think that when you look back on a historic period, you imagine that everyone's always fighting. You hear about the Middle East now, and you imagine that everyone's always fighting. But these things are very sporadic. And I think for the little girl growing up, there were incidents. There was something in 1921 when she was born, and there was something in, I think, 1929. There was a massacre of Jews by Arabs. But for a little girl, these are things that you hear about. A year is a really long time. So it's not as if people were living in a constant state of tension, but every now and again something would happen, and that would color the way people thought, both Arab and Jews.
Indeed, Mr. Aran. And what do you think your mother or your mom did not complete to put in the book?
Oh, that's an interesting question. When I read the book, I feel that she skips over the war years because in the final chapter, you see that there are bombers over Haifa and dropping bombs on Haifa. And then suddenly we're at the end of the war and she's moving to England and she's saying there's a lot of hope. So I feel like she skipped over a lot of stuff. And of course, what I found out is that she actually married an RAF pilot.
Yes.
She fell in love with a dashing RAF pilot and they moved to London. And that's where she began her career in journalism and writing in London. But that marriage didn't last. So she met my dad when she was working at the BBC. And that's, yeah, so she met my dad a few years after that, or just even 2 years after that. So I have a sense that's why she skipped over the Second World War, because a lot of it was this romance with this guy who she remained friends with in
Mm.
London, but
Yes.
the marriage didn't last.
Mr. Oran, in what ways does your mom grapple with the concept of home as the political tensions rises?
Oh, I think that's interesting. There's one chapter which I was very struck by because my grandmom, though I don't remember her very well, uh, but my grandmom in the book comes across as a very wise person. And there's a conversation that she has with her mum where my mum unquestionably thinks that Palestine belongs and is the homeland of the Jews. And her mum says, well, are you sure about that? What makes you say that? And her mum challenges her assumptions and gets her to think a little bit more broadly about the assumptions because for Ruth, for my mum, she was born there. So it was home, and she was very unquestioning. This is where we belong. This is my home. She had no sort of political sense as a child, and her book tries to stay away from politics. I think because it seemed very much from the eyes of a child, but of course, the older Ruth fills in historical detail to give us background to different events. So, for example, there was a struggle for the language of education in Palestine. So a lot of schools, because there were a lot of German charities or German Jewish charities bringing money to Palestine, so the language of education was German. And then, of course, there were people in Palestine who speaking Hebrew said, well, the language of education should be Hebrew, not German. And it was only after the Second World War that it officially became Hebrew as the language for schools. So a lot of the time, people, she calls this chapter the Battle of the Languages. So people were struggling to decide how you should teach children.
Indeed. And Mr. Oran, which cultural practices or tradition described in the book highlighted the uniqueness of the Palestinian daily life and how do they anchor your mom memories?
Hmm. Well, it's interesting that you use the word Palestinian because in modern times, the word Palestinian refers to the Arabs, whereas in her time, Palestinian referred to her. She was a Palestinian, and everyone living there was a Palestinian. So, in terms of your question, she had a secular upbringing. Her dad was a strict atheist. Her mom was an atheist. So she grew up just not believing God. And it's only later in the book where she gets introduced to some of the Jewish cultural events that she's a bit puzzled. And she comes home to her mom and says, "What does this mean? And what does this mean?" And her mom explains to her. So, in terms of those cultural things, I think she was a little bit apart. She was a secular Jew. But in terms of the other cultural events, she was very, very much involved because there was a radio in Haifa. I mean, you can imagine an event like this. Radio was the only radio in Haifa, and everyone would gather around to listen to broadcasts from the BBC or also music. And music was this huge cultural ocean that started to flood into Palestine because of the waves of immigration from Europe. So you got the best musicians from Germany, the best musicians from Holland, from people coming in, and then they wanted to play. They wanted to play. All these different nationalities formed an orchestra, and so she talks about the Palestine Orchestra and how Toscanini came to conduct. And there's a very funny, there's a lot of very funny stories that she tells about Toscanini, because the first time he conducted the orchestra, everyone was completely in awe of him. You know, this very famous conductor, and he was very polite to everyone, and they were very uncomfortable. And the second time, he was again very polite and very quiet, and they were very uncomfortable. But the third time, he blew up at them and he started yelling and shouting. And then they thought, "Oh, okay, great, now we can relax." Yeah.
So, Mr. Oran, how does your mom contrast life in cities like Jerusalem or Jaffa with rural village communities?
Hmm. Well, she wasn't very well traveled, because mm, I think there's one time where she goes from Haifa to Tel Aviv on the train, and that's her first time in a big city. And she sits on the train with a group of Arab women, and they get to chatting, and they're asking her when she's going to get married. And I think by this time she's 14, and she's saying, "Well, I'm not planning to get married," and saying, "Oh, we're going to get married as soon as possible." So there was this interesting exchange on the train with these Arab girls, and uh, so I think that was her only big trip that she talks about in the book. So it's not like she was traveling all over Palestine at that time. She was very much a Haifa girl, and her neighbors called her the barbarian because she was always running around topless on the beach.
Indeed. What challenges does your mom face as a child, and how does experiences reflect broader societal struggles?
Hmm. I think one incident that she reports with a case of bullying. There was
Yes.
a religious Jewish girl at her school, and some of the other girls bullied her. And Ruth talks about being very uh, uncomfortable with the bullying, but also kind of unwilling to step in and kind of rescue this girl. So there's this, yeah, this girl is persecuted for being orthodox and for being religious. So that was one thing that struck me. The other thing that struck me was the divorce of her parents. So my granddad and my grandmom separated, and no one told her. The excuse that was given was, "Oh, your father, he was a teacher and a biologist." And in fact, there's a college in Haifa named after him. But he gave the excuse that he needed to move to Mrs. Haskell's house so that he could work better and not be disturbed by the children. Mrs. Haskell was an American woman. So it takes a long time for her to realize it's only one of her classmates who says, "Oh, your parents are divorced, didn't you know?" That she realizes why her parents have separated, and it hits her like a ton of bricks. She's very upset, and she kind of runs home and asks her mum what's going on, and she finds out the truth. And later on, she becomes friends with Mrs. Haskell, and Mrs. Haskell becomes like a second mentor and teaches her American manners, because in Palestine at the time, if someone offers you food, you say, "Oh, no, thank you." "Oh, no, thank you. That's very kind." And they say, "Oh, no, go on, have some." They say, "Oh, no, 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 I don't want any." And eventually, maybe after the third or fourth time, you say, "Oh, well, maybe I can have a bit." And Mrs. Haskell teaches her American manners and says, "Look, someone offers you food, just say yes." And
Yes.
so she learns a different kind of cultural medium for expressing your needs. So it's quite fun, that scene.
Mr. Oran, how does the memoir reveal about access to education, particularly for girls in pre war Palestine?
Yes. So she education is not free in pre-war Palestine.
Yes.
So people have to pay for it. And so her mum teaches her to read privately, I mean, at home. And she cuts out these letters out of bits of paper and says, this spells dog and this spells cat. And so then she gets really good. My mum was obviously very clever. And she skips a year and the family celebrate because they managed to save a year's tuition fees because Ruth is good enough to go into the next year. Uh, she talks about Arab education as well. She went to college, and there was an Arab girl in her class who dropped out, and she was the only Arab girl in the class at that particular college. And yeah, she drops out and she disappears. So I think education was hard, and it wasn't available to everyone. And my mum clearly was like a vacuum cleaner. She just hoovered up everything she could read and everything, she was just really engaged with culture and music and literature.
So, Mr. Aran, how does your mom correct her personal story to larger historical events unfolding around her?
Okay, so some of the historical events are very much concerned with immigration, because the Jewish population of Palestine started to grow, and the local Arab population didn't like that. And the British at first had, there was something called the Balfour Declaration, which was a white paper written by a British politician, which supported the idea of a Jewish homeland. So, but the British were very duplicitous because they promised a homeland to the Arabs and they promised a homeland to the Jews, and then they let them both down and neither got what they wanted. So she talks about those processes because the British started to really row back on immigration, and eventually they were restricting immigration. So they were stopping the refugee boats from Europe. And this is a very traumatic episode for her, where there's one particular refugee boat. Uh, Two boats come into the harbor. One is a yacht, and there's loads of people on it, and they start to put they're moored out in the harbor, and they're not allowed to dock. They're not allowed to disembark. So they start putting flags out saying, help, please help us. We're starving. Please help us. And so, of course, the community of Haifa is very taken up with this drama. And eventually, the people on the yacht, because it's starting to sink, they get disembarked. But the people on the ship are sent away, and they wake up in the morning and the ship is gone. And there's this sense of grief and outrage that they're not allowed to come. And then there were a lot of illegal immigrants who would sneak their way into Palestine, who were known as scalers. And she talks about them and one incident where she's on a school trip and they get stopped by the British Army, thinking that they might be illegal immigrants. And then one of them says, oh no, I know her. I know her dad. He runs a school in Haifa.
Mr. Aran, as a acupuncturist and as a coach and as an author, what are your short term and long term goals?
Oh, that's a change of gear. Let me think about that. Uh, I have a coach myself, and I said to him, I want to publish 3 books this year, the one that I'm writing and 2 for my friends. And he said, why are you limiting yourself? Why don't you aim for 10 books? And I thought, well, how can I possibly do 10 books? But since he put that idea in my head, it looks like it's going to be 10.
Mm,
So I'm translating one of my books into 5 languages. So that's 5. And
yes.
and 2 coming out, 3. Yeah, I think it'll be 9 books if I'm lucky. One of them is mine, and the rest are uh, second editions or republishing or publishing other authors' books. So that's my goal for this year. And of course, I want to teach more. I love traveling and teaching. So next year, I'll be in Europe a lot. And it looks like at the end of this year, I'll be in your neck of the woods. I'll be in Canada. So yeah, more teaching, more coaching, and enjoying harmonious home life.
Yes, good luck to your goals, Mr. Aran. And what are your piece of advice for those people out there who want to write their book, as well as being a coach or as an acupuncturist?
Okay, I don't think being an acupuncturist, I have anything to say about writing a book, but as a coach, I can share a story. Do we have time for a story?
Yes, indeed. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah. So when I first qualified in acupuncture, I was in my late 20s and I didn't have much work. And I read a review of an acupuncture book written in French. And I'd studied French at school. Actually, I was a university dropout. I studied French at university for a year, but I dropped out. So it was much later that I kind of found myself and found my kind of goals. And so I wrote to the publisher in French and said, look, can I translate your book into English? And they said, well, yeah, okay. And eventually I got the publishing contract. And the book, I got paid £2,000 advance, which is a lot of money in those days. And, uh, and then I started procrastinating. And I just didn't get anything done. And I had a computer with a 5.25 inch floppy drive, like, and I just wasn't getting anything done. And eventually I kind of said to myself, because I just moved into this place where I was living, said, okay, I'm going to make a really nice work surface. I'm going to put bookshelves up here and I'm going to have my printer here and my computer here. And so I'd made myself a workspace. And it was only after that that I started to work. I had all my dictionaries, there wasn't internet in those days. So I had all my dictionaries and all my reference books all on the bookshelf in front of me, paper. And that made my life so much easier. I realized that what had been holding me back was that my environment was not suitable for the task. And as soon as my environment was suitable, I had a room that I enjoyed going in where I could find all my stuff really quickly. I could find my notes. Um, it was great. So that was my first step. So I think that when you're a writer, you have to have a habit of writing. And one of the important things for any habit is to make it easy. It has to be easy. So if it's difficult and you have to, set up your computer somewhere and you have to um, find your reference books in another room, then it's not easy. But as soon as it's easy, then your motivation doesn't count so much. You just go in the room and you start. So my advice to writers is make it easy for yourself. Make sure that you've got a space which is suitable for writing, where you're not going to be disturbed. J.K. Rowling's used a cafe, and I work in a cafe a lot of the time as well because I don't get disturbed at home by partners and animals. So yeah, I just go out and I sit in a cafe and I work in a cafe, and then we meet up for lunch. So that's my advice. If you're a writer, the first step is your environment. Make your environment simple for the task at hand, and then don't tell yourself tomorrow I'm going to write a chapter. Say to yourself tomorrow I'm going to open Microsoft Word or whatever the program is. So make the task a little bit easier.
Yes, people, stop procrastinating. If you have the passion to write, and share to the world. And Mr. Oran, let's go to your mom's book, Miss Ruth Jordan, Daughters of the Waves. How do your mom, parents, or elders respond to changing social and political realities compared to her own generation?
Well, going back to Daughter of the Waves, Mum was known, English was her second language. She was born in British Palestine, so English was her second language. But when she moved to the UK, she loved British culture and she loved working for the BBC. And when she went back to what then was Israel, she didn't like it. she felt it had changed and it had become more coarse and more aggressive than the country she grew up in. So for her, she felt it was different. And for my dad as well, my dad passed away last year at the age of 97. And he also felt that his country had changed. And in some ways, he loved it, but in other ways, he was very critical of it and of the culture. So I think that's probably true of all of us. Britain is not the country I grew up in. I was born in London. I was raised in London, and uh, when I was a kid, we always queued up for everything. And when a bus came, you would queue up, and people would go in a very orderly way. The British are famous for queues, but these days no one queues. People just go in there. And we used to get up for old people. We used to get up and give them our seats, but people don't seem to do that anymore. People don't get out of the way of people with visual disabilities, people with white sticks. So people are less. Mm, the culture's changed. I just say it's different to how I grew up, and I think my mom and my dad felt the same with Israel, that it had become more aggressive and less cultured than it was when they were growing up.
Very well said, Mr. Aaron. Very well said. Beautifully articulated. And before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, my other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season. My abstract poetry in its second season, and book 101 review in fifth season. Comedy 101 in second season. Food 101 and in fifth season too. Geography 101 and love letters in its third season. Mental health 101 is my baby podcast. Movie 101 review and music 101 in its fourth season. And science 101 and sex 101 in first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Oran, how do you think your mom hopes readers take away from her recollections of a world that no longer exists?
I think she wanted people to understand, and she made a very deliberate link, I think, between her growing up and the nation of Israel growing up. And so events happen in her childhood, um, these small, very petty events, and then these big historic events, and she intertwines them so that people have a sense of this time, which was a very optimistic time, very optimistic and full of joy and full of life. And even though there were troubles, the it seems like a simpler and less polarized time than today, for example. So I think that for readers, if you want to understand the beginnings of Palestine, this is a beautiful book, very well written, crisp prose. The beginnings of Palestine, what happened under the British, and what led to the situation that we see today. And I think you'll understand the country a bit better. You'll understand my mum a bit better, and you'll understand history a little bit better if you read the book.
Indeed, Mr. Oran, and thank you so much for republishing the book of Miss Ruth Jordan, Daughter of the Waves, and hoping for more and more empowering books from you to come. So, can you please invite our listeners to support Daughter of the Waves as well as your books?
Okay, well, thank you everybody for watching and listening, and thank you, Daniel, for having me on. And please do enjoy the book, Daughter of the Waves. You can find it online.
Yes, indeed. How about your books, Mr. Aran?
My books are, if you're an acupuncturist and if you're interested in moxibustion and acupuncture, then my books are for you. But if you're not an acupuncturist, then I think they might be a little bit specific, but you can look up Moxa in Motion by Oran Kivity and find out all about Japanese rhythmic moxibustion.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Oran Kivity as well as the Mom's Book Daughter of the Waves. Let's support them and empower them so that Mr. Oran will have more and more and more empowering books to come. So, Mr. Oran, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's been a pleasure. Have a
More to
great
come,
day.
people. More to come, people. See you soon.